Before memory, humans learned the world by walking it. A shoreline was not an idea. It was wet sand under the feet, wind on the face, and danger beyond the next bend. But there is a strange map, often said to carry an older memory of the Earth, a southern land, drawn as if ice were not hiding it. The unsettling question is not whether we should believe every claim around it. The deeper question is why one old drawing can make human history feel suddenly incomplete. What did ancient mapmakers know? What did they only guess? And why do we still ask? The 12,000-year-old map that shows Antarctica without ice. Before a map becomes a mystery, it is first a very quiet object. It lies flat. It does not move. It does not defend itself. It asks the human eye to do something the human body could never do in the beginning. Rise above the ground and see the world as if from nowhere. For most of our story, people did not know the Earth this way. They knew it by walking, by sailing, by remembering where the river bent, where the coast broke open, where the wind changed, and where fear began. The earliest human beings did not step into a complete world drawn in lines. They stepped into weather, hunger, darkness, animal tracks, open water, and uncertain distance. A map is what happens much later, when the body tries to turn those lived fragments into a shape that can be held in the mind. That is why an old map can disturb us. It can seem small, stained, and damaged, yet it can quietly suggest that someone, somewhere, once carried a picture of the world that should not have been possible. The map at the center of this story is often surrounded by a powerful claim, that it shows Antarctica without ice, as if an ancient memory of a hidden continent had survived inside ink and parchment. But the first thing we must do is slow down. The map exists. The questions around it exist. The certainty often placed upon it is another matter. For a sleepful history, this distinction matters, because truth is calmer than exaggeration. The wonder does not disappear when we are careful. In some ways, it becomes deeper. Imagine holding an old drawing of the Earth from a time before satellites, before modern surveying, before a human being could look down from space and see the white curve of Antarctica at the bottom of the world. The lines on such a map are not just geography. They are traces of travel, rumour, copying, correction, mistake, ambition, and memory. Every coast is partly a place and partly a human decision. Every blank area says something about what people did not know. Every distorted shoreline tells us that knowledge did not arrive all at once. It moved through hands, it crossed seas, it was traded in ports, it was bent by politics, language, fear, and hope. When modern eyes find a shape that seems familiar, the mind naturally reaches for a story. It asks whether the past was larger than we were taught. It wonders whether a lost chain of knowledge may have passed from one generation to another, from an older source to a younger copy, until only a fragment remained. This is not a foolish feeling. It comes from something very old in us. Human beings are pattern-seeking animals because our ancestors survived by noticing shapes before they were certain. A broken branch could mean wind, or it could mean a living creature nearby. A darker line on the horizon could be cloud, land, or danger. From the beginning, the human mind learned to complete incomplete pictures. That gift helped us live, but it also means a map can pull us toward meanings the evidence may not fully support. So the question is not simply whether one drawing proves a frozen continent was once mapped without ice. A single old map cannot carry that burden by itself. The better question begins more quietly. What exactly are we looking at when we look at a historical map? Are we seeing the world as it was, the world as its maker understood it, or the world that later viewers want to find inside it? In that space between object maker and viewer, the mystery begins. The old drawing most often linked with this question is the surviving fragment of a world map made in 1513 by Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral, sailor, and mapmaker. That simple sentence matters because it gives the mystery a real object to stand on. This is not a legend floating without a document. There is a known map. There is a known name attached to it. There is a date written close enough to the age of Atlantic exploration to make the object historically important even without any extraordinary claim. But once that foundation is set, care becomes necessary. The map was not drawn 12,000 years ago. The famous claim is different. Some later writers have argued that the map may preserve information from much older sources, perhaps so old that it would point toward a forgotten memory of the far south. That is a large leap, and it must be treated as a leap. The safest beginning is to separate the map from the story that grew around it. Piri Reis lived in a world where coastlines were being gathered at sea faster than scholars could organize them on land. Ships carried spices, soldiers, captives, rumors, charts, and reports across long distances. A harbour could become a library of voices. A sailor who never wrote a book might still carry knowledge in his hands, because he knew the curve of a coast, the depth near a shoal, the way stars changed with latitude, and the danger of trusting a clean line on a page. Long before humans had instruments precise enough to measure the globe with confidence, they had bodies trained by risk. This returns us to the beginning of human knowledge itself. Our species did not first know space as an abstract grid. We knew it as movement through terrain. Later, when societies became larger and voyages longer, that bodily knowledge was copied into marks. A map, then, was never just a picture. It was a compressed record of many journeys, many errors, and many attempts to make distance obedient to memory. The Piri Reis map fits inside that world. Its surviving fragment shows parts of the Atlantic, including regions associated with Western Europe, Western Africa, and the newly reported lands across the ocean. It reflects the intense exchange of geographic information after the voyages of Columbus and other Atlantic sailors. Its own notes, as discussed by historians, say that Piri Reis drew from more than one source. That detail is important because it shows a practical method, not a miracle. A mapmaker could combine older charts, recent reports, local traditions, and copied outlines into one surface. In such a process, accuracy and distortion could live beside each other. A coastline might be recognizable in one place and strangely stretched in another. An island might be placed too far away. A southern edge might bend because separate sources did not fit cleanly together. To modern eyes, trained by school atlases and satellite images, those distortions can feel like clues. But to the people who made and used early maps, distortion was often part of the normal cost of knowledge. The troubling power of this map comes from that mixture. It is historical enough to respect, imperfect enough to invite doubt, and incomplete enough to awaken imagination. If someone says it proves that Antarctica was mapped without ice, the evidence becomes thin. If someone says it is only a confused old drawing with no value, that is also too small. The more honest view is quieter. The map is a real artifact from a world learning to redraw itself. It shows how knowledge moved across cultures and seas. It shows that humans were always trying to widen the edge of the known world. And because part of it seems to point toward a southern mystery, it asks us to look carefully before deciding what the past left behind. What makes this old map so persistent is not simply its age, or its beauty, or even the famous name attached to it. Many old maps are beautiful, many old maps are strange. Some are filled with sea monsters, imagined islands, sacred centres, and coastlines that bend like memory rather than measurement. But this map reaches into a more specific unease. It seems to touch the place where ordinary history meets the human fear of missing something. The idea that a southern land might appear where Antarctica should be makes the mind pause, because Antarctica has a special role in modern imagination. It is not only a continent, it is the hidden bottom of the world, a white silence larger than ordinary experience, a place most people will never touch with their own bodies. For early humans, the world began at ground level, with nearby water, edible plants, animal movement, shelter, and the slow learning of safe paths. Nothing in that first human world resembled a complete view of Earth. No one could stand outside the planet and see all its edges. So when a much later map appears to hint at a land beyond the reach of its age, it feels like a crack in the wall between what people could know and what we imagine they may have known. That feeling is powerful, but feeling is not evidence. The careful question is narrower. Why would a map made in the early 16th century contain a shape that later viewers compare with Antarctica? And what does that comparison really mean? There are several possibilities, and not all of them require a lost civilization or a vanished science. One possibility is that the southern shape is not Antarctica at all, but a distorted continuation of South America, bent eastward, or drawn from mixed sources that did not fit together. Another possibility is that it reflects old geographical expectations about a southern land, because many mapmakers once believed there should be land in the far south, long before Antarctica was confirmed by direct observation. A third possibility is that copying, rotating, compressing, and combining maps created a form that now looks suggestive to modern eyes. These possibilities are less dramatic, but they belong to the known habits of historical mapmaking. They also remind us that maps are not mirrors. They are arguments made with lines. Each line says, "Someone believed this belonged here," even if that belief came from a sailor's report, a copied chart, a scholar's theory, or a mistake carried forward because no one yet had better information. This is why the title question must remain open rather than become a conclusion too early. The map does not allow us to say, in a responsible way, that people 12,000 years ago mapped Antarctica without ice. That would ask one fragile object to prove too much. Yet the map also should not be dismissed as meaningless, because it reveals something true about human beings. We have always tried to extend memory beyond the body. The first people learned land by moving through it. Later people learned sea routes by repeating danger across generations. Mapmakers gathered those remembered movements into marks that could outlive the traveller. In that sense, every old map is a survival device. It carries not only coastlines, but also the wish to reduce fear by giving shape to distance. The Piri Reis map became famous because one portion of its shape allowed modern viewers to ask whether a forgotten chain of knowledge might have reached further back than written history can safely follow. The responsible answer, for now, is not yes or no. It is a slower question. How much of the past is preserved in objects? How much is added by later imagination? And how carefully must we listen before an old map becomes a story about the whole human past? Before a human being could imagine the earth as a sphere wrapped in oceans, the world was known in pieces. A valley was known because people crossed it. A river was known because it gave water, fish, mud, and danger. A coastline was known because it could feed a small group, block their path, or open a route beyond sight. The earliest human knowledge of place was not a picture from above. It was a memory carried in the feet, the skin, the stomach, and the eyes. People learned where shadows fell, where animals returned, where storms came from, and where the land became too difficult to trust. Long before there were charts, there were repeated journeys. Long before there were drawn coastlines, there were remembered edges, the cliff after the beach, the marsh after the river mouth, the cold wind beyond the headland. A map came much later, but it never fully escaped those beginnings. Even when ink finally replaced footsteps, the ink still depended on someone having moved through the world, or having heard from someone who had. That is why ancient and medieval maps can feel both intelligent and strange. They were not made by people who lacked minds. They were made by people who lacked the kind of total view that modern life now treats as ordinary. Today, a child can see the shape of continents on a screen in a few seconds. But for most of history, no sailor, trader, pilgrim, soldier, or scholar saw the whole planet. They saw routes, they saw ports, they saw fragments. They joined those fragments with reports from others, and the joining was always imperfect. A coast seen from a ship is not the same as a coast measured from the sky. A bay remembered after months at sea may change shape in the telling. A dangerous cape may grow larger in the mind because many lives were lost near it. A distant island may drift across a chart because its location came from a sailor's estimate, not a measured coordinate. In that world, geography was a shared memory before it was a settled science. When we look at the Piri Reis map, or any map made before modern surveying, we are looking at a surface where many human limitations meet many human strengths. The limitation is obvious. No satellite, no global grid, no reliable way to fix every point with modern precision. The strength is quieter. People could still gather knowledge across astonishing distances. They could listen to travellers, compare coastlines, copy older drawings, correct a harbour, add a river mouth, and preserve useful information long enough for another voyage. This kind of knowledge did not require a lost superscience. It required patient accumulation. It required generations willing to trust, doubt, repeat, and revise. That process began in the deep human past, when survival depended on remembering the shape of a local world. Over time, the local world widened. Footpaths became trade routes, river crossings became settlements, shorelines became sailing corridors. Seas that once marked the end of safety became roads for exchange. By the early 16th century, when Piri Reis made his famous map, human geography had become a vast conversation. No single person could know it all directly. A mapmaker had to become an organizer of other people's seeing. He gathered pieces of the world from sailors, conquerors, merchants, and earlier maps, then placed them into one visual field. The result could be useful without being fully accurate. It could preserve a real coastline beside a mistaken one. It could carry fresh knowledge from the Atlantic beside older inherited ideas about the South. This is the calm foundation for the mystery. Before asking whether the map shows Antarctica without ice, we must first remember how maps were made when the world was still being assembled from memory. A sea chart begins with a need, not with a dream of completeness. A sailor does not first ask for the whole earth. He asks where the harbour lies, where the rocks wait under shallow water, where the current pushes a vessel sideways, and where the wind usually turns against him. This practical need shaped many of the maps used around the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, the Atlantic coasts, and later across wider waters. They were tools for movement. Their lines were meant to help people survive distance. A portolan chart, one important kind of medieval sea chart, could show coastlines, ports, compass directions, and networks of lines that helped sailors think about bearings across water. It was not a modern atlas. It did not need to explain every inland mountain or every unknown land. It needed to make the edge between land and sea usable. In that sense, the shoreline became the first serious language of navigation. For human beings, this was a long development from older forms of knowing place. Our earliest ancestors did not draw harbours, but they watched edges with the same seriousness. Forest edge, river edge, cliff edge, grassland edge, the edge between safety and exposure. Later sailors watched another edge, the coastline, because it was both guide and threat. If they stayed too far away, they might lose their place. If they came too close, they might strike stone, sandbar, or reef. A chart gave them a way to carry a dangerous edge in memory before they reached it. But every such chart depended on uncertain human gathering. One crew might record the distance between two capes by days of sailing, another by estimated direction, another by copied tradition. A harbour might be drawn carefully because many ships used it. A remote coast might be left vague because few reliable reports reached the mapmaker. The result was not random ignorance. It was uneven knowledge. Some areas could be surprisingly useful, while others remained compressed, stretched, rotated, or imagined. This matters for the story of the Piri Reis map, because its strange southern shape sits inside that older habit of assembling the world from fragments. When many sources are combined, errors do not simply disappear. Sometimes they multiply. A coastline from one source may be attached to another coastline from a different scale. A report of newly seen land may be fitted onto an older expectation. A blank may be filled because mapmakers often disliked emptiness, especially when inherited geography suggested that something should be there. The sea itself encouraged this mixture, because sailors moved through a world without fixed visual boundaries. On land, a mountain remains before the eye. At sea, position is often an act of judgment. Clouds, stars, birds, floating plants, swells, colour of water, and the taste of wind could all become signs. But signs can be misread. The human body was still involved even in organised navigation. Hands felt rope and rudder. Eyes judged horizon and star height. Skin knew weather before instruments named it. This bodily knowledge was powerful, but it was not the same as modern measurement. When we see a distorted old coastline, then, we should not immediately treat distortion as a hidden code. It may be the shadow of ordinary human effort. Yet, ordinary does not mean unimportant. These charts were built from courage, repetition, and memory. They show that people were able to transform lived experience into shared guidance across generations. The old sea map is therefore not a failed satellite image. It belongs to another way of knowing the Earth, one that began with the human body at the edge of land and slowly became a network of marks, names, routes, warnings, and uncertain southern spaces. To understand why a map can feel so powerful, it helps to return to the oldest human problem: how to carry a place after leaving it. A person can leave a valley, but the valley does not leave the mind. A group can move away from a river, but the memory of where it bends, where it floods, and where animals drink may remain useful for years. Before writing, before cities, before named continents, human beings survived by turning landscape into memory. That memory was not abstract. It was attached to hunger, thirst, shelter, danger, and return. A hill was not only a hill, it was the place where one could see smoke, weather, or moving animals. A shore was not only a shore. It was food, risk, passage, and sometimes the end of known ground. In that early world, the human body was the first map. Feet measured distance by tiredness. Eyes measured open space by fear and possibility. Skin read wind and cold. The stomach remembered where food had been found. Over many generations, these bodily memories became shared stories, and shared stories became roots. A child did not need a drawn chart to learn that one path was safe after rain and another was not. Knowledge passed through repetition, gesture, warning, and example. Later, when humans began to scratch marks onto bone, stone, wood, skin, clay, or parchment, those marks did not replace memory. They extended it. They allowed a place to be carried by someone who had never seen it. This is one of the quiet revolutions behind all mapmaking. A line lets experience travel beyond the body that first earned it. A name lets one person's memory become another person's expectation. A symbol allows danger to survive the death of the person who faced it. The story of old maps, including the Piri Reis map, belongs to that long human movement from lived terrain into shared signs. By the time sailors were crossing wide seas and mapmakers were gathering information in imperial ports, the process had become more complex, but its root was still the same. Someone went somewhere. Someone remembered. Someone described. Someone copied. Someone placed that description beside another. Across time, a coastline became not merely a physical edge, but a chain of human transmission. This is why the question of Antarctica without ice cannot be approached only as a puzzle about one shape on one old surface. It is also a question about how knowledge survives, changes, and sometimes becomes confused as it travels. A map may preserve a real observation, but it may also preserve an error made useful by repetition. It may hold a sailor's direct sighting, a scholar's inherited theory, a guess drawn to complete a blank, or a copied curve that no one later understood. When these layers settle together, the result can look more mysterious than any single source actually was. For modern people, used to clean satellite images and exact coastlines, this layered uncertainty can feel almost unnatural, but it was normal for most of human history. Our species began by knowing small territories intensely, then slowly widened that knowledge through migration, trade, war, exploration, and storytelling. The world became larger not because one mind suddenly saw it whole, but because many partial memories were joined. Some joined well, some did not. In this sense, the Piri Reis map is not only a window into Ottoman cartography or Atlantic exploration, it is a reminder of the human path from the first remembered footstep to the first imagined globe. Every old line on it asks us to slow down and ask what kind of memory we are seeing. Direct experience, copied knowledge, inherited geography, practical navigation, or later imagination. And somewhere inside that question lies the reason an old map can still trouble the sleeping mind. Piri Reis belonged to a world where the sea was not an empty space between lands, but a living corridor of power, trade, danger, and information. He was an Ottoman admiral and navigator, working in a time when the Mediterranean and the Atlantic were becoming more tightly connected through war, commerce, and exploration. To understand his map, it is useful to picture not a lonely scholar inventing a secret picture of the Earth, but a practical sailor in a world full of moving reports. Ships arrived with damaged sails, captured charts, stories of strange coasts, names of islands, arguments over distances, and warnings about currents. Knowledge came wet, worn, uncertain, and valuable. A mapmaker in such a world was not simply an artist, he was a collector of human movement. He had to decide which voices to trust, which older lines to copy, which reports to place beside one another, and how to turn unstable travel knowledge into a surface someone else could use. This is where the historical Piri Reis becomes more interesting than the myth around him. He does not need to be imagined as the keeper of a lost ancient science. His real setting is already rich enough. The early 16th century was a moment when the known world was being rearranged in the minds of sailors and rulers. The Atlantic was no longer only a frightening western water. It had become a route filled with new claims, new violence, new exchanges, and new uncertainty. Western Europe, West Africa, the Caribbean, and the eastern coasts of the Americas were entering the same cartographic conversation, although not evenly, not peacefully, and not with perfect understanding. Piri Reis stood within the Ottoman world, but the information he used did not belong to one culture alone. Maps had already crossed languages and borders for centuries. Islamic geographers, Mediterranean sailors, Portuguese pilots, Spanish voyages, older classical ideas, and practical coastal knowledge all formed part of the larger sea of information from which early modern maps were made. This matters because the famous map of 1513 was not meant to be a magical object. It was a working compilation. It gathered knowledge from several sources at a time when the globe was still being learned in fragments. That method helps explain both its value and its strangeness. A coastline copied from a reliable sailing chart could sit beside a shape taken from rumour or inherited theory. A newly reported island could appear near an older imagined land. A recognisable coast could be bent because the mapmaker was trying to join sources that used different scales, directions, or assumptions. Such mixtures were normal. They were not signs of stupidity. They were signs of a human world stretching its knowledge faster than its tools could organise. In the deep beginning of human life, distance was learned one body at a time. A person walked, returned, remembered, and taught. In Piri Reis's age, that same ancient process had grown into something larger. A ship went out, returned, brought a report, and that report entered the memory of an empire. The body still stood at the root of knowledge, but now the body had become a fleet, a port, a library of charts, a chain of copies. This is why the Piri Reis map should be approached with patience. Its importance does not come only from the claim that it may show Antarctica without ice. Its importance also comes from what it clearly shows, a world where humans were learning to combine scattered observations into a wider image of Earth. The mystery begins not because one man saw everything, but because many people saw fragments, and one man tried to make those fragments speak together. The map we are speaking about is not a complete world map lying before us in its original fullness. What survives is a fragment, a portion of a larger work made in 1513. That fact is quiet, but it changes the way the mystery must be handled. A fragment does not speak with the same clarity as a whole object. It has edges that are not chosen by the maker, but by damage, loss, and survival. We do not possess every coastline Piri Reis drew. We do not possess the full balance of the design. We look at what history allowed to remain, and then we try to understand it without pretending that the missing parts are still there. This is one reason old artifacts are so delicate in the mind. They invite us to imagine what is gone, but honest history must keep saying, we are looking at a survival, not a complete answer. The surviving piece is drawn on parchment and shows part of the Atlantic world as it was understood in the early 16th century. It includes coastlines associated with Western Europe and Western Africa, and it gives attention to lands across the ocean that had recently entered Mediterranean and Ottoman awareness through reports, captured charts, and the violent expansion of Atlantic voyages. It is important because it stands near the beginning of a new mental geography. The Americas were not yet settled into the familiar outline seen in modern atlases. Names, coastlines, islands, and distances were still moving through human hands. For a mapmaker, the world was not a finished image waiting to be copied. It was a field of uncertain testimony. Some information came from sailors who had seen a coast directly. Some came from charts made by rivals. Some came through translation, war, trade, or rumour. The older human pattern was still present beneath this imperial world. Since the beginning, people had carried places by memory before turning them into signs. In Piri Reis's time, that carrying had become larger and more political, but it was still human. A coastline on the map may represent observation, but it also represents the path by which observation travelled. The map's incompleteness also affects the famous southern question. When later viewers focus on a southern landform and compare it with Antarctica, they are examining only one piece of a lost whole. That does not make the comparison meaningless, but it does make certainty unsafe. A missing context can make a shape seem more isolated, more intentional, or more mysterious than it may have seemed inside the original complete map. If the full work had survived, perhaps the southern portion would look clearly connected to a known cartographic habit. Perhaps it would appear as a distorted continuation of South America. Perhaps it would still trouble us. We cannot know with final confidence. What we can say is that the surviving fragment belongs to a real historical setting, and that its lines should be read first through the practices of that setting. Early modern maps often combined inherited ideas with new reports. They could preserve useful information while also carrying forward errors. Their purpose was not always the same as a modern scientific map. They organized the world for navigation, power, trade, curiosity, and possession. They helped rulers imagine reach. They helped sailors imagine passage. They helped societies make distant places thinkable. This is why the Piri Reis fragment remains valuable even if the Antarctica claim is treated carefully. It shows a moment when the human image of Earth was changing shape. It shows knowledge in motion, not knowledge at rest. A complete satellite view gives us a finished outline, but this fragment gives us something more human. The unfinished labour of people trying to join the known, the newly heard, and the not yet understood into one fragile surface. One of the most useful things about the Piri Reis map is that it does not pretend to have appeared from nowhere. Its own written notes point toward a map-making practice built from several sources. This is not a small detail. It places the map inside a human chain of copying, comparing, borrowing, and adapting. The maker did not claim to have sailed every coastline himself. He worked from materials that had already passed through other hands. Some were likely connected with Mediterranean traditions. Some were linked with Portuguese and Spanish oceanic knowledge. Some may have carried older geographical ideas that had been copied and reshaped long before his own lifetime. In the world of early modern navigation, this was normal. A map was not always a record of one journey. It could be a meeting place for many journeys. It could gather the sight of one sailor, the report of another, the inherited outline of an older chart, and the corrections of someone who had returned from a more recent voyage. Such a map was a conversation held in ink. This matters deeply for the Antarctica question, because a map made from many sources can contain many kinds of truth at once. One line may preserve a coastline that someone truly saw. Another may preserve a mistake that had been copied so often it gained authority. Another may reflect a theory about how the world ought to be shaped. Another may be a practical adjustment made to fit unmatched pieces together. When later viewers ask whether the southern form shows Antarctica without ice, they are not only asking what Piri Reis knew, they are asking what all his sources may have known, misunderstood, imagined, or inherited. That is a much wider and more uncertain question. Human knowledge has always moved this way. At the beginning, a path through grass or forest was remembered by people who had walked it. One generation taught another where the water was, where the ground softened, where animals crossed, where danger tended to wait. The memory was real, but it changed as it was retold. A route could become shorter in a story, longer in fear, clearer in ritual, or more uncertain when the land changed. Later, maps carried knowledge in a similar way. They preserved, but they also transformed. A copied line is never only a copied line. It is a decision to trust the past. It is also a risk, because the person copying may not know why the line was drawn in the first place. Piri Reis's notes remind us that the map belongs to this long pattern of transmission. It is not a sealed message from a lost age. It is a layered object from a connected world. If some of its sources were older, that does not automatically mean they reach back into deep prehistory. Older can mean decades, generations, or inherited scholarly tradition. It can mean charts circulating among sailors, records taken from captured ships, or geographic ideas repeated because they were useful enough, respected enough, or simply available. The more careful we are, the more interesting the map becomes. Instead of using it as a shortcut to a dramatic conclusion, We can see it as evidence of how knowledge travelled across languages, empires, religions, and seas. The Ottoman world was not isolated from European navigation, and European navigation was not separate from Islamic, classical, and local traditions. The sea carried more than ships. It carried measurements, errors, names, fears, and ambitions. A coast could be seen by one culture, renamed by another, copied by a third, and misunderstood by a fourth. By the time it reached parchment, it was already history. That is why the Piri Reis map deserves attention, even without accepting the strongest claims made about it. Its notes show a working mind inside a working world, trying to gather scattered fragments into a useful image. The real mystery is not only whether one southern shape resembles a hidden continent, it is how much human memory can survive inside a line after passing through so many hands. Long before Antarctica was confirmed by direct observation, many educated mapmakers and geographers believed that some great southern land ought to exist. This belief did not begin with ice, penguins, or polar science. It began with an older attempt to make the Earth feel balanced in the mind. If there were great lands in the north, some thinkers reasoned, perhaps there must also be land in the far south. The idea was not based on a modern expedition reaching the Antarctic coast. It was a geographical expectation, a way of filling the unknown edge of the world with a shape that seemed logical to people working from limited evidence. To modern eyes, this can be easy to misunderstand. We live after the blank spaces have been named. We know there is a continent around the South Pole, covered in ice, measured by science, mapped from ships, aircraft, and satellites. Because we already know Antarctica exists, we may look backward and assume that every old southern land must be an early glimpse of it. But old maps often carried imagined lands not because someone had seen them clearly, but because the mapmaker inherited a theory about what the world should contain. The human mind has always disliked emptiness when emptiness feels too large. In the earliest human world, a blank place beyond the known valley or shore was not simply empty. It was a possible source of food, danger, water, shelter, or loss. People learned to fill the unknown with caution before they filled it with measurement. Much later, scholars and mapmakers filled unknown spaces with lines, names, and expected forms. The impulse was different in tools, but not entirely different in nature. A blank on a map could feel like a wound in knowledge. A southern continent helped close that wound. This imagined land is often called Terra Australis in historical discussions. The southern land. It appeared in many forms across older maps, sometimes huge, sometimes vague, sometimes connected to other imagined coastlines, sometimes decorated with names and borders that made it look more certain than it was. It belonged to a long tradition in which inherited geography, classical learning, sailor reports, and speculation could live together on the same surface. That does not mean the people who drew such maps were careless. They were working with the intellectual materials available to them. They tried to make a whole world from partial knowledge. When the far south was not observed, it was still thought about. When it was not measured, it was still placed inside a theory of the globe. This is why the southern edge of an old map must be approached slowly. A shape in the south may reflect real coastline. It may reflect confused reports. It may reflect a copied tradition. It may reflect the expectation that land ought to be there. Without careful context, the modern viewer can turn expectation into evidence too quickly. The Piri Reis map enters this problem because the famous southern interpretation depends on what we think that southern form represents. If we begin with Antarctica already in mind, the eye may search for Antarctica. If we begin with historical mapmaking in mind, other possibilities appear. The shape may belong to the old habit of extending known lands into the unknown. It may show how mapmakers handled the uncomfortable space below the familiar world. It may show the meeting of knowledge and guesswork at the edge of the page. The wonder is not reduced by this caution. In fact, the wonder becomes more human. Before people knew the whole Earth, they still tried to imagine the whole Earth. They stood, mentally, at the edge of their information and drew beyond it. Terra Australis was not Antarctica in the modern scientific sense. It was an idea about the South before the South had been properly reached, measured, and separated from imagination. The name means southern land, but in older geography it often meant something broader than a single known continent. It could be a balancing mass, a theoretical land, a place where the unknown had been given weight and outline. To understand why that matters, we have to remember that old maps did not always divide the world into the same categories we use now. A modern map is expected to separate known coastlines from uncertain coastlines, confirmed land from hypothesis, measured shape from decorative tradition. Older maps often allowed these things to sit together. A real shore could lie beside an inherited guess. A copied name could rest on a place no one in that tradition had personally seen. A blank could be filled because the mapmaker believed the world would make more sense if it were filled. This was not simply fantasy. It was an attempt to reason from limited knowledge. If the Earth had great land masses in one region, some thinkers imagined that the globe might need a corresponding land in another. Balance was not only visual, it was intellectual. The world was being made understandable by symmetry, authority, and inherited learning as much as by direct observation. For early humans, the unknown was never neutral. Beyond the familiar path, there might be food, enemies, cliffs, water, cold, or shelter. The mind learned to treat absence as something active. Much later, when scholars and sailors faced unknown space on maps, the same human discomfort with emptiness remained in a more formal shape. A blank ocean at the bottom of the world could feel incomplete. Terra Australis gave that incompleteness a form. It allowed people to imagine that the Earth had an unseen lower body, even if the details were not known. This is why the idea became so persistent. It was flexible enough to survive correction. As voyages improved knowledge of coastlines, the southern land could shrink, move, break apart, or change meaning. It could be drawn very large on one map and more cautiously on another. It could absorb rumours from voyages into southern waters. It could be confused with lands that were real but not yet fully understood. The history of Terra Australis is therefore a history of the mind negotiating with the edge of evidence. The Piri Reis map belongs to an earlier moment in this long negotiation. It does not show the modern world as a complete object. It shows a world being assembled. When later viewers see a southern shape and think of Antarctica, they are seeing through modern knowledge. They already know that Antarctica is real. They already know that a continent lies around the pole, but Piri Reis and his sources did not stand in that modern position. They worked within older habits of copying, reporting, and reasoning. A southern land on an old map may not mean that someone had sailed along the ice-free Antarctic coast. It may mean that the mapmaker inherited a southern expectation, or extended a known coastline, or tried to fit several sources into one surface. The difference is important because it protects the mystery from becoming a false claim. If Terra Australis was a theory, then its appearance on maps is evidence of how people imagined the unknown, not proof that the unknown had already been fully discovered. Yet there is still something deeply moving here. Human beings began with local knowledge, with paths remembered by bodies and taught through generations. Over time, that small knowledge widened until people were trying to picture the whole planet, including places they had never seen. Terra Australis shows that hunger for wholeness. It shows the desire to complete the Earth before the Earth had fully answered back. One reason old southern lands become confusing is that modern viewers do not come to them empty-handed. We already carry Antarctica inside our minds. We have seen its white outline in school atlases, documentaries, weather maps, and satellite images. Even if we have never travelled there, we know that a continent waits at the lower end of the globe, hidden under ice, remote from ordinary life. So when we look at an older map and find a large or unusual landform in the south, the eye can move too quickly. It can say, almost before thought begins, that this must be Antarctica. But recognition is not always proof. Sometimes recognition is the mind placing a familiar shape onto an uncertain one. This is a very human habit. At the beginning of human life, seeing patterns quickly could be useful. A faint line in grass might be a path. A dark shape near trees might be an animal. A curve in cloud or shoreline might suggest shelter, storm, or danger. The mind learned to compare the unknown with what it already knew. That ability helped our ancestors survive, but it also means that later humans can find familiar forms in incomplete evidence. An old map is exactly the kind of object that invites this. Its coastlines may be damaged, compressed, rotated, or copied from sources that no longer survive. Its missing areas create silence. Its strange lines ask to be completed. When the modern viewer completes them with Antarctica, the result can feel powerful, even if the historical foundation remains uncertain. The idea of Terra Australis makes this problem stronger. For centuries, southern lands were drawn because people expected, reasoned, or imagined that they should exist. Those lands could be large, vague, or connected to other coastlines in ways that do not match modern geography. Yet once real Antarctica became known, many earlier southern shapes began to look prophetic. A line that may have been speculation could now appear like a discovery. A distorted extension of South America could now seem like a hidden polar coast. A theoretical land meant to balance the globe could be mistaken for direct knowledge of the Antarctic continent. This does not mean every comparison is dishonest. It means comparisons need humility. The past did not know itself in the categories we use today. A mapmaker drawing a southern mass may not have been thinking of a continent under ice at all. He may have been working with inherited ideas, practical reports, and the pressure to make the unknown edge of the world appear orderly. Piri Reis's map becomes famous in this space between what was drawn and what later people hoped it might mean. The southern feature may feel suggestive because it sits where our minds expect a great southern mystery, but location alone is not enough. Shape alone is not enough, especially when the map is a surviving fragment and when early modern cartography often allowed real observation and inherited theory to share the same page. If we are careful, the question becomes more interesting, not less. We stop asking only whether the map secretly proves an ice-free Antarctica. We begin asking how human beings look backward through their own knowledge, and how the known present can reshape the uncertain past. This is deeply connected to the long history of our species. Humans began by making sense of nearby ground. Later, they made sense of rivers, coasts, seas, and stars. Eventually, they tried to make sense of lands no one in their world had clearly seen. Every step widened the circle, but every step also carried the old habit of filling darkness with pattern. So when an old southern land becomes Antarctica in the modern imagination, we are seeing two histories at once: the history of mapmaking and the history of the human mind trying to turn uncertainty into a recognizable world. The claim that made the Piri Reis map famous in modern mystery writing is easy to state, but difficult to prove. Some later writers argued that a landform near the lower edge of the surviving map resembles the coast of Antarctica as it would appear without its ice cover. From that resemblance, a much larger idea was built. Perhaps the map preserved information from an extremely ancient source, older than known civilization, old enough to remember a southern continent before ice hid its true shore. It is a powerful thought. It makes one drawing seem to open a door beneath ordinary history. But before walking through that door, we have to pause and notice how much weight has been placed on one uncertain shape. The map itself was made in 1513. Antarctica was not confirmed by modern exploration until much later. The interior and bedrock beneath its ice became known only through scientific methods far beyond early modern navigation. So the claim does not merely say that Piri Reis drew an unusual southern land. It asks us to believe that knowledge of a hidden polar coastline somehow passed through many lost stages and survived inside a 16th century compilation. That is possible only as a speculation, not as a conclusion supported by broad historical agreement. This distinction is essential. The phrase Antarctica without ice sounds precise, but it can hide several different ideas. It might mean the modern coastline at the edge of the ice. It might mean the bedrock shape beneath the ice sheet. It might mean a rough southern landform that only seems similar of spirit when rotated, adjusted, or interpreted generously. These are not the same thing. A map can resemble something without accurately representing it. A broken cloud can resemble an animal. A coastline drawn from uncertain reports can resemble another coast far away. The human mind, shaped from the beginning to notice patterns quickly, often feels recognition before it checks the path that produced it. Our ancestors needed that speed, when a shape in dim light might be danger. But in history, speed can become a problem. If we leap from resemblance to proof, we may turn a fragile clue into a false certainty. The safer path is to ask what evidence would be needed. We would need to show that the southern form truly matches Antarctica better than other explanations. We would need to show a credible route by which that knowledge reached Piri Reis or his sources. We would need to show that the supposed ancient information is more likely than ordinary map-making practices, such as distortion, copying, speculation, and the old expectation of a southern land. Without that, the idea remains fascinating but not secure. This does not make the map boring. It makes it more human. The real object stands at the meeting point of known history and modern imagination. It came from an age of sailors, empires, captured charts, coastal reports, and uncertain oceans. It was made when people were still trying to join fragments of the world into a single surface. In that setting, a strange southern shape does not need to be dismissed, but it must be handled gently. It may reflect a distorted South American coast. It may reflect inherited ideas about Terra Australis. It may reflect the difficulty of fitting many sources together, or it may preserve something we do not yet fully understand. The honest position is not to close the question with excitement, and not to erase the mystery with impatience. It is to hold the map as an artifact of human curiosity, and to ask why one uneven line can make us imagine that the deep past once knew more than it has told us. The strongest versions of the Antarctica claim have never become the careful consensus of historians, geographers, or specialists in old maps. That matters because a claim about a 12,000-year-old memory of an ice-free continent is not a small adjustment to history. It would require a very large chain of evidence. It would ask us to accept that people in deep prehistory had mapped a remote polar land, that their information survived across immense spans of time, that later cultures copied or inherited it, and that a 16th century Ottoman mapmaker unknowingly preserved a fragment of it. Each link in that chain would need support. A resemblance on a damaged map is not enough. History is patient because it has to be. It cannot build a mountain from one stone, no matter how interesting the stone may be. Scholars who study maps often begin from the habits of mapmakers themselves. They ask what sources were available, what traditions were common, how coastlines were copied, and how errors travelled. In that framework, the Piri Reis map looks remarkable but not impossible. It belongs to a world of compilation, where knowledge from different seas and cultures could be gathered into one surface. It also belongs to a time when the Americas were still being fitted into older geographical thinking. A strange southern form may therefore be explained without invoking an unknown ancient civilization. It may be a distorted rendering of South America. It may reflect inherited belief in a southern land. It may show the difficulty of combining charts with different orientations and scales. These explanations are not as thrilling at first glance, but they require fewer unsupported assumptions. That is why they are taken more seriously in careful historical work. This does not mean every detail has been settled forever. Old artifacts can remain open. A map can still carry puzzles, but openness is not the same as permission to say anything. The human mind has always lived between evidence and imagination. At the beginning of our species, that balance helped people survive. A faint track in mud might mean an animal passed nearby. A distant sound might be harmless wind, or it might mean danger. Our ancestors had to infer from fragments. They could not wait for perfect certainty, but in the study of the past, the same habit must be slowed down. If we complete every fragment with the most dramatic story, we may lose the more ordinary and more trustworthy truth. The ordinary truth here is already large. A map made in 1513 could bring together information from sailors, older charts, rival powers, and inherited geography. It could show parts of the Atlantic world at a moment when knowledge was moving faster than stable understanding. It could preserve real reports beside mistakes. It could reveal how people tried to hold the earth in the mind before they had the tools to measure it fully. That is enough to make it important. The danger begins when importance is replaced by certainty. To say the map proves Antarctica was known without ice is to move beyond what the evidence can safely carry. To say the map is worthless because that claim is weak is also unfair. A calm reading allows both things to be true. The Antarctica interpretation is not widely accepted as proof, and the map remains a valuable historical object. It teaches us that mystery does not need to overthrow knowledge in order to be meaningful. Sometimes the deepest mystery is not that the past possessed secret powers, but that human beings, with limited tools and incomplete reports, still manage to build fragile pictures of a world far larger than any one life could see. The Antarctica idea remains attractive because it touches something deeper than cartography. It touches the fear that human history may have lost more than it remembers. A map is a quiet object, but when people believe it contains knowledge from a vanished age, it becomes almost alive in the imagination. It seems to whisper that the official timeline is only the surface, and that underneath it there may be older footsteps, older voyages, older minds, and older ways of seeing the Earth. This is why the Piri Reis map continues to draw attention even when the strongest claims about it remain unsupported. The appeal does not come only from the shape on the parchment, it comes from the empty spaces inside our knowledge of the past. Written history is short compared with the full life of our species. For a long time, human beings lived without writing, without monuments that could easily survive, without libraries, and without durable records of everything they knew. They knew landscapes, seasons, animals, stars, rivers and coasts, but most of that knowledge passed through living memory. When the people died, much of it vanished with them. This is a real loss, not a fantasy. The deep past did lose voices, it did lose paths, it did lose names for places, methods of travel and local understandings that no modern archive can fully restore. Because that loss is real, the imagination is tempted to fill it with something grand. A mysterious map then becomes a vessel for a larger longing. Perhaps something extraordinary survived after all. Perhaps a line on parchment is not only a line, but the last echo of a forgotten world. The difficulty is that longing cannot become evidence by itself. The fact that human knowledge was lost does not mean any specific lost knowledge existed. The fact that ancient people were observant and capable does not mean they mapped Antarctica. The fact that old maps contain surprises does not mean every surprise points to a hidden civilization. Care is not an enemy of wonder. It is what keeps wonder from turning into a story too heavy for the facts beneath it. Still, the emotional force of the claim is worth understanding. Human beings are not drawn to lost maps only because they want to be deceived. Often, they are drawn because they sense that history is incomplete. And in one broad sense, that feeling is correct. The beginning of humanity was not written down by the people who lived it. The first coastlines, followed by migrating groups, were not preserved in atlases. The first sea crossings, the first remembered stars, the first warnings about dangerous water, the first names for far horizons, all of these mostly disappeared into time. Our species began with bodies moving through uncertain space, learning by hunger, weather, and fear. Later, much later, those movements became routes, stories, charts, and maps. Somewhere between the first remembered shoreline and the Piri Reis map lies an immense human chain, mostly broken, mostly silent. That silence is the real source of the fascination. The Antarctica claim gives the silence a dramatic shape. It says, perhaps the lost past was not only rich, but far more advanced than we know. A responsible history cannot accept that leap without stronger evidence. But it can still honour the quieter truth beneath the desire. People have always known more than they could preserve. They have always forgotten more than they could pass on. The old map becomes powerful because it stands at the edge between preserved knowledge and vanished memory. It asks us not only what was drawn, but why we hope so deeply that the drawing might contain a message from before history learned how to speak. A more cautious reading of the Piri Reis map begins with a simple possibility. The strange southern land may not be Antarctica at all. It may be a distorted extension of South America, pulled, bent, or joined in a way that feels unusual to modern eyes. This explanation may sound less mysterious, but it belongs more naturally to the world in which the map was made. Early 16th century mapmakers did not work with a fixed global outline. They worked with fragments. A coastline from one source might be copied at one scale, another coastline at a different scale, and a third piece might arrive through a report that was useful but imprecise. When these pieces were placed together, the result could stretch or fold geography in ways that now look strange. South America itself was still entering European, Mediterranean, and Ottoman knowledge. Its eastern coasts were known unevenly. Its southern limits were uncertain. Its relationship to imagined southern lands had not yet been settled into the clean separation we see in modern atlases. So a mapmaker trying to complete a southern edge might extend a known coast into the unknown, especially if inherited ideas suggested that land continued there. In this view, the famous shape is not a hidden Antarctic shoreline, but a human attempt to make an incomplete Atlantic world readable. This fits the older history of mapping more calmly than the dramatic claim. Since the beginning, human beings have often extended knowledge beyond direct experience. A hunter following tracks may infer where an animal has gone. A traveller seeing a river bend may imagine where it continues. A sailor hearing reports of land beyond a cape may draw a line where no eye has fully measured. This ability to project beyond the scene is part of human intelligence. It allowed our ancestors to survive and plan. But when placed on a map, projection can harden into apparent fact. A guessed continuation may later look like a discovered coast. A copied curve may survive long after its reason is forgotten. A southern blank may be filled by a line that feels authoritative simply because ink makes it visible. The Piri Reis map was made in exactly the kind of environment where this could happen. It gathered materials from different traditions and tried to organize them into one image. A coastline could be accurate in one region and speculative in another. It could hold a real harbour beside a mistaken bend. It could carry a new Atlantic report beside an older expectation of land in the south. If the southern form is connected to South America, its distortion is not surprising. Before reliable longitude, before full coastal surveys, before modern projection systems were consistently applied, the problem of placing distant shores in relation to one another was extremely difficult. Even skilled mapmakers could produce shapes that seem compressed, rotated, or misplaced. This does not make the map worthless. It makes it historical. It shows knowledge in motion, before the world had settled into the outlines now printed in every schoolbook. The modern viewer must be careful because Antarctica is already present in our mind. We know where the white continent is. We know there is land beneath the ice. We know that the southern end of the globe holds a real continent, not merely a theory. That knowledge can quietly guide the eye. It can make a bent South American coastline appear more mysterious than it was meant to be. A responsible reading does not demand that every uncertainty vanish. It only asks which explanation requires the fewest unsupported steps. A distorted South American coast, shaped by compilation, copying, and inherited expectations, requires no lost global survey and no unbroken memory from deep prehistory. It asks only that mapmakers behaved as mapmakers often did. They gathered fragments, trusted some, adjusted others, and drew beyond the place where certainty ended. A mistaken line on an old map is not always a sign of ignorance, and it is not always a sign of secret knowledge. Often, it is the visible mark of a difficult process. When early mapmakers brought several sources together, they were not simply copying the Earth. They were trying to make different human memories agree on one surface. One chart might record a coast as seen from the deck of a ship. Another might carry an older outline copied many times. A third might describe a place in words rather than measurements. A fourth might come from a captured vessel, useful but incomplete. When these sources met, they did not automatically form a clean picture. They had to be adjusted. Sometimes they overlapped badly. Sometimes a coastline had to be turned, shortened, stretched, or connected to another line because the mapmaker did not possess the missing information between them. To modern eyes, such adjustments can appear meaningful in ways the maker never intended. A bent shore may look like a different continent. A repeated mistake may look like a preserved secret. A blank filled by expectation may look like direct observation. This is why error itself has a history. It travels. It can be copied because it is attached to something useful. It can survive because no one yet has the evidence needed to remove it. Since the beginning of human life, knowledge has moved through this mixture of usefulness and uncertainty. A group may remember a dangerous valley correctly, but misremember the distance beyond it. A story may preserve the location of water while changing the shape of the path. The important part survives because it helps people live, while the surrounding details shift. Maps work in a similar way. They may preserve a real port, a real cape, or a real direction of travel, while surrounding those useful facts with distortions. In the Piri Reis map, the question is not whether every line is right or wrong. The question is how many layers of transmission stand behind each line. The southern form that later became famous may have passed through copying, interpretation, and adjustment before it reached the parchment. If a source showed part of South America and another source suggested land farther south, the mapmaker might join them in a way that now seems strange. If a coastline had been drawn without accurate distance, it might be placed too far, curved too sharply, or extended too confidently. If older geographical ideas expected a southern land, those ideas could influence how uncertain space was completed. None of this requires deception. None of it requires foolishness. It requires only human beings working at the edge of what they know. This is one of the calmer lessons of old cartography. A map can be wrong and still intelligent. It can be inaccurate and still preserve valuable knowledge. It can misplace a coast and still reveal the routes by which information moved. The modern world often treats accuracy as the only measure of value, but for most of history, usefulness came first. A sailor needed warnings, directions, and recognizable edges. A ruler needed a picture of reach. A scholar needed a way to place reports inside a broader order. In that setting, a map did not need to satisfy a satellite. It needed to make a dangerous world thinkable. When people today ask whether the Piri Reis map shows Antarctica without ice, the safer answer is that the shape may have emerged from ordinary processes of mapmaking. Mixed sources, uncertain distances, inherited expectations, and the human habit of drawing past the boundary of confirmed knowledge. The mystery remains, but it becomes a historical mystery rather than a miracle. It asks how imperfect knowledge can survive so long, and why a line drawn from uncertainty can still feel like a message from a lost world. An old map does more than show where people believed lands and seas to be. It also shows the outer edge of their confidence. The most revealing places on such a map are often not the accurate coastlines, but the uncertain ones, because uncertainty leaves a different kind of trace. A clean modern map hides the struggle that produced it. It gives the world as if it had always been settled into its present outline. An old map does the opposite. It lets us see the human mind working with incomplete reports, inherited ideas, practical needs, and empty spaces that demanded some kind of shape. The Piri Reis map belongs to that older world of uneven knowing. It does not simply record geography. It records the limits of geography as people of its time could gather it. That is why its southern edge matters. Whether that form is a distorted South American coast, a remnant of older southern land expectations, or a mixture of several traditions, it shows how human beings behaved when knowledge ran out, but the desire for order continued. They did not always leave the unknown blank. Sometimes they extended a line. Sometimes they joined one report to another. Sometimes they gave shape to an expectation because the mind wanted the earth to feel whole. This habit is not separate from human origins. In the beginning, our species lived by moving through partial knowledge. A person could know one valley deeply and still know almost nothing beyond the hills. A group could remember the way to water, but only guess what lay beyond the next ridge. The unknown was not empty. It was active, full of possible danger and possible life. To survive, humans had to build a workable image of space before they possessed complete evidence. That ancient pattern remained alive in mapmaking. The tools changed from feet and stories to ink and parchment, but the mental task was familiar. Connect what is known, estimate what is missing, and make the world usable enough to cross. The Piri Reis map therefore teaches us that old maps are not only about places, they are about thresholds. They show where observation met rumour, where memory met theory, where practical sailing knowledge met inherited geography. A coastline drawn with confidence might rest on repeated voyages. A nearby distortion might rest on a copied mistake. A southern form might carry the pressure of an older idea that land should continue where direct knowledge had faded. None of these possibilities should be forced into a single dramatic conclusion too soon. The value of the map is not that it gives us a clean answer. The value is that it allows us to watch knowledge becoming uncertain at the edge of the page. Modern people often forget how recent our total image of Earth really is. We look at the planet from above so often that we begin to imagine that seeing it whole is natural. But for nearly all of human history, the Earth was never seen whole by any person. It was assembled inside human minds from journeys, warnings, coastlines, stars, stories, and returned ships. Every map before modern global measurement was a negotiation between the seen and the inferred. That does not make such maps weak. It makes them honest in a way modern maps are not. They carry the marks of human effort openly. Their errors are part of their testimony. When we ask whether one old map shows Antarctica without ice, we are also asking how much certainty a historical object can bear. A careful answer sees the map as a record of reach rather than proof of a lost world. It shows us a species trying to widen its mental horizon, drawing beyond direct sight, and leaving behind not just lines of land and sea, but the quiet outline of its own limits. Antarctica is difficult to imagine because it is both a continent and a cover. What most people picture is not bare land but ice, a vast white surface, thick, cold, and remote from the ordinary scale of human life. Yet beneath that ice there is rock, mountain, basin, valley, and buried coastline shaped by a very long geological past. Modern science can study that hidden world, but not by looking at it in the simple way a sailor might look at a coast from a ship. The land beneath Antarctica has to be measured indirectly, through instruments, surveys, radar, gravity data, seismic information, and long scientific work. This matters for the Piri Reis question because the phrase, "without ice," can make the problem sound easier than it is. A person may imagine that if the ice were removed, a clear coastline would appear like the edge of Africa or South America on a school map. But Antarctica is not that simple. Ice changes how a continent appears. It covers land, presses on the crust, flows outward, hides valleys, and builds shelves over the sea. The visible edge of ice is not the same as the bedrock edge beneath it. The coastline we see today is shaped by frozen water as much as by stone. To claim that an old map shows Antarctica without ice, one would need to know what version of Antarctica is being compared. The modern ice edge, the underlying bedrock, the continental shelf, or a reconstructed shape adjusted for ice weight and sea level. These are scientific questions, not just visual questions. Early humans, standing at the beginning of our species' story, knew land with their senses. They knew what could be walked, touched, crossed, feared, or remembered. Even much later sailors knew coasts by sight, soundings, winds, and approach. Antarctica beneath ice does not offer itself to that kind of knowing. Its hidden form belongs to a world that modern instruments slowly reveal. This is why the idea of a precise ancient map of an ice-free Antarctica asks for more than a mysterious resemblance. It asks for a level of knowledge that would be difficult to obtain without methods far beyond ordinary pre-modern navigation. That does not mean the past was unintelligent. It means different kinds of knowledge have different limits. Ancient and early modern people could navigate by stars, read winds, identify coasts, preserve routes, build ships, and carry information across cultures with great skill. But seeing through an ice sheet is another matter. The distinction is important because it protects both the past and the present from distortion. We do not need to diminish ancient people by saying they were simple. We also do not need to give them tools for which there is no evidence. Respect means placing their abilities in their real world. The real world of Piri Reis was a world of ships, copied charts, coastal reports, and geographical inheritance. It was not a world of polar radar surveys. The real world of Antarctica is a continent whose surface hides much of its own body. Its mountains and basins became known through careful scientific investigation over time, not through ordinary coastal observation from afar. When the map's southern form is compared with Antarctica, then, the comparison should remain gentle and limited. It may reveal a suggestive shape to modern eyes. It may reveal how strongly we want old objects to carry lost knowledge. But it cannot, by itself, show that someone once mapped the hidden continent beneath the ice. The wonder of Antarctica is already deep enough without forcing the map to prove more than it can. It is a place where the Earth hides part of its face, and where human knowledge had to learn new ways of seeing. The question of Antarctica without ice sounds simple, until we place it beside what is known about the continent's climate history. Antarctica has not been a stable, bare southern land during the brief span of human civilization. Its ice sheets are ancient, complex, and tied to long changes in atmosphere, ocean circulation, temperature, and the position of the continent itself. Scientists can study these changes through ice cores, sediments, rocks, fossils, and geophysical surveys, but the picture they build is not the kind of picture that can be reduced to one old coastline on one old map. Some regions of Antarctica may have changed over time. Some exposed areas exist even today, where mountains, dry valleys, or coastal rock rise through or beside the ice. The edges of ice shelves can advance and retreat. Sea level has also changed through the deep past, but these facts do not mean the whole continent was ice-free in a period close to early human memory. The evidence for Antarctica's great ice cover reaches far deeper than the age suggested by the famous claim. This is where careful language protects the listener from confusion. To say that ice has margins, movement, and history is not the same as saying that ancient people saw the hidden bedrock of Antarctica. To say that parts of Antarctica are not covered in the same way everywhere is not the same as saying that a mapmaker inherited a full image of a bare continent. These distinctions may feel slow, but they are necessary. Human beings began their journey in landscapes where evidence could be sensed directly. A cold wind, a shifting shoreline, a river channel, an animal track, a patch of edible plants, all of these could be read by the body. Antarctica beneath ice is different. It asks questions that the body alone cannot answer. What lies under a kilometre of ice? Where does rock end and floating ice begin? How has the crust responded to the weight of frozen water? What would the coastline look like if ice, sea level, and land rebound were all considered together? These are not questions an early sailor could settle by looking south from a deck. They require measurements that belong to modern science. Because of that, any claim that a 16th century map preserves a 12,000-year-old image of ice-free Antarctica must remain outside secure historical knowledge unless stronger evidence appears. It is not enough that a shape feels suggestive. It is not enough that Antarctica is mysterious. A responsible claim must fit what is known from geology, glaciology, archaeology, and the history of cartography at the same time. When those fields are brought together, the dramatic reading becomes difficult to support. The more grounded reading is that the map's southern shape arose from human map-making traditions, not from a lost polar survey. Yet this does not remove the deeper value of the question. It teaches us how easily one phrase, without ice, can hide many different realities. It can mean visible land, buried rock, changing ice margins, or imagined coastline. It can move from science into myth before the listener notices. A calm history must slow that movement down. Antarctica is not a blank symbol waiting for mystery. It is a real continent with a long natural history, much of it inaccessible to ordinary human senses. The Piri Reis map is also real, with its own historical world of sources, copying, and uncertainty. The error begins when these two realities are forced to prove one another. The wiser approach is to let each remain what it is, a hidden continent slowly revealed by science, and an old map slowly understood through the limits of human knowledge. Between them lies not a secret answer, but a lesson in patience. The past can be fascinating without being forced to say more than its evidence can carry. The phrase, Antarctica without ice, can sound like one clear image, but it actually contains several different ideas that should not be blended together. There is the Antarctica people see today, a continent whose visible outline is shaped largely by ice. There is the land surface beneath that ice, hidden from ordinary sight. There are small exposed places where rock appears through the ice or beside it. There are floating ice shelves that extend over the sea. There are also scientific reconstructions that ask how the continent might look if ice weight, sea level, and the slow response of the Earth's crust were considered. These are related, but they are not the same. When a person says an old map shows Antarctica without ice, the first careful question should be, which Antarctica? The edge of the ice? The bedrock under the ice? The coastline adjusted for a different sea level? A partly exposed region? Or only a southern shape that reminds modern eyes of the polar continent? Without this distinction, the claim becomes too slippery. It can move from one meaning to another without being tested. This is where the map's mystery must slow down again. Human beings began by knowing land in the most direct way possible. A hand could touch stone, feet could test mud, eyes could follow a ridge or a shoreline. The earliest knowledge of place was built from exposed surfaces, from what the body could meet. But Antarctica's hidden body does not reveal itself in that way. A mountain buried under ice cannot be followed by a traveller. A basin beneath frozen weight cannot be drawn by a sailor watching the horizon. A coastline hidden beneath ice, water, and geological change is not the same as a coast seen from a passing ship. So even if older navigators were highly skilled, their skill belonged to visible skies, visible seas, visible coasts, and inherited routes. It did not automatically reach through ice. There are places in Antarctica where ice does not cover every stone, and that fact is sometimes used loosely in mystery claims. But local exposure is not the same as an ice-free continent. A nunatak, a dry valley, a coastal outcrop, or a mountain ridge rising through snow can tell scientists important things, but it does not give a mapmaker a full outline of buried land. It is like seeing the top of a drowned tree and claiming to know the whole forest floor beneath the water. The fragment is real, but the conclusion can become much larger than the evidence. This is also why the difference between ice edge and bedrock matters. The visible white boundary of Antarctica is not simply the stone outline of a continent. Ice flows, spreads, breaks, floats, and retreats. Its edge may hide the land beneath or extend beyond it. The bedrock below is shaped by ancient geology and by the pressure of ice over long time. A drawing that resembles one version may fail to match another. If the standard of comparison keeps changing, almost any uncertain southern landform can be made to look more meaningful than it is. The safer historical reading keeps these layers separate. It allows Antarctica to remain scientifically complex, and it allows the Piri Reis map to remain historically complex. The map may contain a strange southern form. Antarctica may contain hidden land beneath ice. But the presence of both facts does not automatically join them into one conclusion. What we have, more honestly, is a meeting between an old human habit and a modern scientific image. The old habit is to complete the unknown with lines. The modern image is a continent we now know exists beneath ice. Between those two, the mind feels a connection. Careful history asks us to feel that connection without surrendering to it. Old maps attract the eye because they seem to carry memory longer than any single life. A person dies, a sailor disappears, a language changes, a port falls silent, but a line on parchment may remain. That line can cross centuries without explaining itself. It can outlive the hands that drew it, the voice that named it, and the fear that made it necessary. This is why a map feels different from many other old objects. A broken cup tells us someone drank. A tool tells us someone worked. A burial tells us someone mourned. But a map tells us someone tried to hold distance itself. It tells us that a human mind once reached beyond the place where the body stood and tried to make faraway space return as memory. That is a profound act. From the earliest days of our species, survival depended on remembering places that were not immediately visible. The water behind the ridge, the safer crossing downstream, the season when animals returned, the shore where shellfish could be gathered. A person who remembered space could live more wisely inside time. A group that shared such memory could protect children, return to food, avoid danger, and slowly widen the world it understood. A map is a late form of that ancient need. It is memory made visible. It is a way of saying, even when I am not there, the place can still be carried. This is why lost maps feel almost sacred in the imagination. They seem to promise that something forgotten may not be fully gone. The Piri Reis map speaks to this feeling with unusual force because it sits between a real historical object and a larger, uncertain dream. It is not merely an old drawing of coasts. It has become, for many people, a symbol of possible lost knowledge. The thought is quiet but powerful. What if some memory survived from a world whose records were otherwise erased? What if the past left a trace so faint that only a distorted coastline remains? Even when the evidence does not support the strongest claims, the emotional pull remains understandable. Human beings do not only want facts, they want continuity. They want to feel that the long chain behind them has not been completely broken. This longing becomes stronger when the subject is geography, because geography feels older than culture. Empires rise and fall, but mountains remain. Languages vanish, but seas continue to move. A map seems to join fragile human memory to the more durable body of the earth. When people look at an old map and see something that might be Antarctica, they may be responding not only to the shape, but to the desire for a bridge across lost time. That desire should be treated gently, but not obeyed blindly. A longing for lost memory can lead to beautiful questions, and it can also lead to careless conclusions. The map must be allowed to be mysterious without being forced to become proof of what it cannot prove. Still, its power is real. It reminds us that most human knowledge has not survived in permanent form. Countless routes, names, warnings, and local understandings vanished without writing. The deep human past was full of minds as awake as ours, but most of what they knew passed through breath, gesture, and practice, not through archives. An old map, therefore, becomes more than a diagram. It becomes a place where preserved knowledge touches vanished knowledge. It lets the modern mind rest beside the edge of what can no longer be recovered. And perhaps that is why we keep looking at it. Not because it gives a final answer, but because it allows us to feel, for a moment, that the forgotten Earth may still have a memory. The human brain is not comfortable with scattered fragments. It wants a path between them. It wants one mark to explain another, one shape to answer a silence, one surviving object to become the key to everything that is missing. This habit is not a weakness by itself. It is one of the reasons human beings survived. A mind that could connect signs had an advantage in a dangerous world. A footprint near water, a broken branch, a sudden silence among birds, a change in wind, a darker line at the horizon. Each fragment could matter before certainty arrived. The early human brain learned to live by inference. It joined small clues into possible futures. It asked what might be near, what might happen next, and what should be remembered for the group. In that older world, waiting for perfect proof could be costly. A cautious pattern, even an imperfect one, could save a life. But the same ability that helped people read landscapes can also make later people overread history. When we look at an old map, especially one that is damaged, incomplete, and surrounded by mystery, the brain begins to connect what is visible with what it already knows. It sees a southern shape. It remembers Antarctica. It notices that Antarctica is hidden under ice. It remembers stories of lost knowledge. Then, quietly, it starts building a bridge between all these pieces. The bridge may feel natural, but it is not automatically evidence. It is the mind doing what it has always done, making a story from fragments. This is why the Piri Reis map is so powerful in modern imagination. It offers just enough reality to hold the eye, and just enough uncertainty to let the mind move beyond it. The map is real. Its maker was real. Its strange southern form is real as ink on parchment. Antarctica is real. Its hidden bedrock is real. The loss of ancient knowledge is also real in a broad human sense. But when these real things are joined too quickly, they can create a conclusion that is stronger than the evidence. The brain feels satisfaction when scattered facts form a single line. It dislikes unfinished edges, yet history often remains unfinished. The responsible listener has to rest inside that incompleteness without forcing it to close. This is not easy, because a lost map story offers emotional comfort. It suggests that the deep past may still be recoverable. It suggests that history has a hidden order and that one artifact might reveal it. For a species shaped by memory, this is deeply appealing. Human beings began as creatures who depended on remembered place, a route to water, a seasonal path, a safe camp, a dangerous crossing. All of these became part of shared survival. Over time, the same memory-making instinct reached far beyond local ground. It became myth, navigation, genealogy, law, and eventually cartography. Maps are therefore perfect objects for the pattern-seeking mind. They are already made of connections. Lines connect coasts, names connect places to speech, directions connect movement to expectation. When a map contains a strange gap or distortion, the mind tries to repair it. In doing so, it may discover a real historical question, or it may create a false certainty. The difference depends on patience. The Piri Reis map invites the question of older sources, southern lands, and the limits of early modern geography. It does not require us to accept every dramatic answer that has gathered around it. A calm mind can notice the resemblance without kneeling before it. It can honour the mystery without turning it into proof. Perhaps the deeper lesson is that our brains are still ancient in this way. Even while looking at parchment, scans, atlases, and scientific reconstructions, We remain descendants of people who survived by reading incomplete signs. We still look for the animal in the shadow, the path in the grass, and the lost continent in the line. There is a quiet kind of discomfort that appears when history does not give a clean answer. It is not fear exactly. It is the feeling of standing before a closed door and knowing that the door may not open, even if the room behind it once existed. The Piri Reis map creates this feeling because it offers both evidence and absence at the same time. We can see the parchment. We can read parts of the notes. We can place the map in the early 16th century. We can compare it with the habits of navigation, compilation, and southern land thinking. Yet we cannot recover every source used to make it. We cannot ask the lost sailors what they saw. We cannot restore the full map from the surviving fragment. We cannot remove every distortion and discover one final intention beneath the ink. That uncertainty is difficult for the human mind. Since the beginning, our species has needed answers that could guide action. Where is water? Where is shelter? Which path returns to camp? Which sound in the dark is harmless? And which one should wake the body? The mind was shaped to reduce uncertainty because uncertainty could be dangerous. But historical uncertainty is different. No decision about survival depends on forcing one old map to confess more than it can know. Here, patience becomes a form of honesty. The question is not only what the map shows, but how we live with the fact that it may never show enough. This is where the Antarctica claim becomes a lesson about human thought. One person may look at the southern shape and feel wonder. Another may feel skepticism. Another may feel the loss of a possible hidden past. None of these reactions is strange. They are different ways of standing before incomplete evidence. The danger begins when discomfort turns into certainty too quickly. If the mystery is painful, the mind may close it with a dramatic answer. If the claim feels too unlikely, the mind may close it with dismissal. Both movements can be too fast. A calmer approach allows the map to remain in the middle, real, valuable, suggestive, limited, and unfinished. This middle space is where much of honest history lives. Human beings have always lived between what is known and what is inferred. The first remembered landscapes were never complete. A group knew one valley better than another, one shore better than the next, one season better than the years beyond memory. Knowledge came unevenly, and life continued inside that unevenness. Later, maps gave the uneven world a visible surface. They made uncertainty look calmer, but they did not remove it. A blank space, a guessed coast, or a copied mistake could sit beside true knowledge and practical guidance. That mixture is not a failure of the human past. It is the normal condition of people trying to enlarge their world with limited tools. The Piri Reis map reminds us that the past is not a sealed container of facts waiting to be opened. It is a damaged inheritance. Some parts remain clear, some are blurred, some are gone. When we ask whether it shows Antarctica without ice, we are also asking how much uncertainty we can tolerate before imagination takes over. The answer may be less about Antarctica than about us. We want the lost past to be recoverable. We want fragments to join. We want the Earth to remember what humans forgot. But a responsible history asks for a gentler strength. To keep looking without pretending. To keep wondering without claiming possession. And to let an old map remain a question that teaches us how to think. The Piri Reis map does not need a lost super-civilization in order to matter. In fact, forcing that idea onto it may make the real human achievement harder to see. A dramatic story can sometimes cover a quieter wonder. It can make us look past the hands, ships, languages, ports, and memories that actually shaped the object. The map is already remarkable because it belongs to a time when the world was being joined through imperfect but powerful human networks. Sailors were crossing dangerous waters. Empires were competing for routes and knowledge. Charts were being copied, seized, traded, translated, and revised. Reports from one coast could travel into another political world. A line drawn in one tradition could be absorbed into another. The result was not a perfect image of Earth, but it was something extraordinary, a shared attempt to make distant spaces thinkable before any person could see the planet whole. That is enough. It does not require Atlantis, visitors from the stars, or a vanished race with modern instruments. Those claims may feel exciting, but they often remove attention from the real people who lived, observed, sailed, copied, doubted, and worked. They replace human history with a shortcut. The deeper respect is to ask what ordinary humans, using the tools of their own time, were able to accomplish. From the beginning of our species, human knowledge grew through contact with place. A person learned a path by walking it. A group learned a coast by returning to it. A child learned danger because an elder remembered it. No single life could hold the whole world, but many lives together could hold more than one body could see. That is the root of the mapmaker's work. By the 16th century, this ancient pattern had expanded across seas and empires. Instead of one group remembering one valley, many communities were contributing fragments to a widening image of the globe. This does not make the map less mysterious. It makes the mystery more grounded. How did information move so far? Which sources did Piri Reis trust? Which coastlines came from direct observation, and which came from copies? Which errors were inherited, and which were created while joining mismatched materials? These questions are slower than the claim of a lost global survey, but they are more faithful to the object. They let the map remain what it is, a survival from a working world of navigation and compilation. The Antarctica claim often attracts attention because it seems to break the ordinary timeline, but the ordinary timeline is not as dull as it sounds. It contains human courage, violence, trade, curiosity, and error. It contains sailors moving across waters where a wrong estimate could mean death. It contains mapmakers trying to compare sources that did not agree. It contains the pressure of rulers who wanted knowledge because knowledge could become power. It contains the quiet persistence of older geographical ideas, including the expectation of southern lands. When these forces meet on parchment, the result can look strange without requiring a hidden civilization beneath it. A line can be puzzling because humans were working with incomplete knowledge, not because they possessed impossible knowledge. This distinction protects the dignity of the past. Ancient and early modern people do not become more impressive when we give them unsupported powers. They become more impressive when we see what they actually did under real limits. The Piri Reis map is valuable because it shows human beings extending memory beyond the body, beyond the voyage, beyond the single culture. It shows a world learning itself through fragments. Its wonder is not that it proves a secret age before history. Its wonder is that history itself, with all its limits, was already capable of carrying so much across the sea. What may be most remarkable about the Piri Reis map is not that it might hide impossible knowledge, but that it openly shows possible knowledge moving through a very human world. Think of the map not as a sealed riddle, but as a gathering place. Into it came travel, trade, war, copying, memory, and ambition. A ship returning from the Atlantic could carry more than cargo. It could carry a coastline in the mind of a pilot, a rough chart in a chest, a rumour about islands, a warning about reefs, a story of winds, or a name taken from another language. A captured vessel could become a source of geography. A port could become a place where distant experiences were exchanged without anyone seeing the whole path those experiences had travelled. The mapmaker's task was to listen to that crowded world and make it visible. This is already a profound achievement. It required judgment, not magic. It required the ability to compare unequal sources, to trust some lines more than others, to arrange fragments into a shape that might help another person imagine the sea before entering it. From the beginning, human beings survived by turning experience into shared knowledge. One person found water, another remembered the season, another learned the safe path, and another warned the young where not to walk. Over generations, this became a social memory larger than any individual body. In Piri Reis's age, the same ancient pattern had grown across oceans. Instead of one group remembering one valley, sailors, empires, merchants, and scholars were helping build a wider memory of Earth. That memory was not pure. It carried violence, conquest, error, and rivalry. It also carried careful observation. A map from such a world should not be expected to look like a modern scientific product. It is closer to a meeting of many human attempts. This is why its mixture of accuracy and distortion is so important. The accurate parts remind us that early navigators could gather real geographic information across great distances. The distorted parts remind us that information did not travel cleanly. It passed through translation, copying, damage, secrecy, pride, fear, and uncertainty. A coastline could be preserved because it mattered to ships. Another could be bent because no one yet knew how it should meet the rest of the world. A southern landform could appear because old theory, new report, and unfinished geography had not yet separated from one another. The map is therefore not a miracle outside history. It is history made visible. It shows a species learning to extend its senses through networks. No one person could see Africa, Europe, the Atlantic Islands, the Americas, and the imagined far south from one place. But many people, moving separately, could leave traces that a mapmaker might join. This is one of the quiet powers of civilization. Not that it gives one mind total vision, but that it allows many partial visions to accumulate. The Piri Reis map stands inside that accumulation. It belongs to a world where a sailor's risk could become a line, where a merchant's report could become a name, where a captured chart could become part of another empire's knowledge, and where a wrong curve could still survive because it sat beside useful truth. When we ask whether it shows Antarctica without ice, we should not miss this larger lesson. The real wonder may not be a lost super-civilization watching the planet from above. The real wonder may be that human beings, still limited by bodies, winds, ships, and uncertain speech, could nevertheless make a picture of a world far larger than any one of them could ever touch. History does not become meaningful only when it breaks the rules of science. Sometimes it becomes meaningful because it shows how much human beings could do while still living inside real limits. This is a gentler kind of wonder, and it is easy to miss. A claim about a lost civilization with impossible knowledge feels large because it removes difficulty. It imagines that someone, somewhere, already saw the whole answer. But the actual history of mapmaking is more patient and more human. It is the story of people trying to make a world from pieces. It is the story of sailors who saw one coastline but not the next. Scholars who inherited old ideas but lacked new measurements, rulers who wanted maps because maps could become power, and copyists who preserved both truth and error because they often could not separate one from the other. This does not make the Piri Reis map smaller, it makes it more honest. Its strangeness belongs to a world where knowledge was active, unfinished, and uneven. A shoreline could be useful without being exact. A southern land could be drawn because theory, rumour, and partial observation had not yet been sorted into modern categories. A fragment could survive long enough for later people to ask questions its maker may never have imagined. From the beginning of human life, our species did not wait for perfect knowledge before moving. People crossed valleys before they understood whole regions. They followed animals before they understood ecosystems. They entered boats before they knew the full shape of the sea. The human mind learned to live by enough knowledge, not complete knowledge. That same condition remained. In the age of Piri Reis, ships moved into uncertain waters. Reports returned imperfectly. Maps were made because waiting for total certainty was not possible. In this way, the map is not a failure to meet modern standards. It is a record of how people acted before modern standards existed. It shows knowledge doing what knowledge often does, reaching forward, correcting slowly, and carrying mistakes until better evidence arrives. That may be less dramatic than saying the map proves Antarctica without ice, but it is closer to how history usually works. The past rarely gives one clean revelation. More often, it gives layered objects, damaged records, mixed motives, and partial views. If we force every strange object to overturn everything, we may lose the quieter truth it actually contains. The Piri Reis map teaches that human beings were neither helpless nor all-knowing. They were capable, observant, ambitious, and limited. They could gather distant reports and still misunderstand them. They could preserve a real coast and still draw another part uncertainly. They could inherit an old idea about a southern land and place it beside newer Atlantic information. This is not a contradiction. It is the normal texture of human knowledge. And perhaps this is why the map remains so useful for a calm history of the human mind. It reminds us that error is not always the opposite of intelligence. Sometimes error is what intelligence looks like before the evidence is complete. A wrong line may show where someone tried to understand. A distortion may reveal the pressure of missing information. A mysterious southern form may not prove a lost science, but it can show how strongly people wanted the Earth to be whole inside the mind. The true wonder, then, is not that history secretly defeats science. The true wonder is that science and history together allow us to see the map more clearly, not as proof of an impossible past, but as a fragile trace of humans trying to know a planet too large for any one life. Something was lost when human beings stopped reading the world mainly through the body. The loss was not simple, and it was not total. Modern maps, satellite images, radar surveys, and global coordinates have given us a vision of Earth that earlier people could not possess. They have made navigation safer, distances clearer, and continents visible from above. But every gain changes the shape of attention. When the world becomes a screen, a grid, or a finished outline, the body no longer has to ask as many questions. It no longer needs to feel the slope of land for direction, watch the colour of water for depth, notice the smell of rain before a storm, or remember a shoreline by the rhythm of fear and return. For most of human history, knowing a place meant being changed by it. A coast was not just a line. It was wet sand, sharp rock, shell beds, dangerous tides, edible life, cold wind, and the sound of waves in darkness. A forest edge was not just a boundary. It was shelter, risk, shade, animal movement, and uncertainty. Early humans lived inside a world that had to be read slowly because survival depended on attention. Their maps were not drawn first. They were felt. The body remembered distance by effort. The eyes remembered safe paths by repeated seeing. The hands remembered tools, ropes, wood, stone, and skin. The group remembered where older people had gone and what had happened there. That older way of knowing did not vanish at once. Sailors, herders, hunters, farmers, traders, and travellers carried it for thousands of years. Even in the age of Piri Reis, the sea was still known partly through the body. A navigator could use instruments and charts, but he also watched wind, swell, birds, clouds, currents, and the behaviour of the vessel itself. His knowledge was not detached from sensation. It was practical, local, and alive. This is one reason the Piri Reis map feels so different from a modern map. It does not come from a world where Earth is already complete in the human mind. It comes from a world where knowledge still had weight, danger, and distance inside it. Every line depended on someone crossing water, hearing a report, copying a chart, or trusting a memory passed through other hands. When we ask whether the map shows Antarctica without ice, we are also asking from the position of people who already know too much from above. We know Antarctica as a white shape at the bottom of the globe. We know hidden land can be studied with instruments. We know the planet can be measured without walking its edges. That knowledge is powerful, but it can make older knowledge seem either too small or strangely magical. We may forget that ancient and early modern people were not trying to see Earth the way we see it. They were trying to survive and move within it. The evolutionary loss is subtle. We have not lost intelligence. We have lost some closeness to the slow signs by which intelligence once lived in landscape. A modern person may cross a continent by following a blue line on a device, while barely noticing the wind, slope, soil, stars, or changing smell of water. This is not a moral failure. It is the cost of new tools. The old map asks us to remember that the world was once learned through exposure. Before Earth became an image, it was a place that touched the body first. And perhaps the mystery of the southern land feels so deep because it reminds us of a time when knowing the world meant standing inside it, not above it. An old map reminds us that knowing the world once required a different intimacy. It was not enough to possess an image. A traveller needed signs. A sailor needed sky, wind, water, and memory. Before instruments became precise, and long before machines could locate a person from above, direction was often gathered from the surrounding world in small, repeated acts of attention. Stars gave order to night. Winds carried seasonal habits. Birds could suggest nearby land. Floating plants, cloud forms, wave patterns, and the colour of shallow water could become clues. A coastline might be known not only by its outline, but by the smell of marsh, the sound of breakers near hidden rocks, the pull of current near a river mouth, or the way fog gathered around a headland. This knowledge was not romantic. It was practical, A mistake could cost a vessel, a cargo, or a life. In that sense, the old world was read with seriousness because it could not be safely ignored. The human body stood inside the evidence. It felt weather before language explained it. It learned caution before theory organized it. This returns us to a very deep beginning. Early humans did not inherit a planet already divided into continents, latitudes, and named oceans. They inherited ground, horizon, hunger, cold, and the need to return. A safe path was knowledge. A remembered water source was knowledge. A warning about a dangerous shore was knowledge. Over time, these remembered signs became stories, traditions, routes, and eventually charts. The map did not replace the body all at once. It grew from the body's long conversation with place. That is why old sea charts carry a different kind of meaning from modern maps. Their lines are not only measurements, they are traces of human exposure. Behind a harbour name may stand generations of arrival. Behind a dangerous cape may stand wreckage and fear. Behind a dotted island or uncertain coast may stand a rumour carried across salt water, repeated because someone believed it might matter. The Piri Reis map belongs to this world of carried signs. It was made in an age when sailors still depended on the meeting of chart and sensation. A drawn coastline could guide them, but the sea still had to be read moment by moment. The chart might suggest a direction, while the wind argued with it. The line might show a shore, while the water warned of unseen danger. Knowledge was never only on the page. It remained distributed between parchment, memory, hand, eye, and weather. This helps explain why the question of Antarctica without ice feels larger than a cartographic puzzle. It asks us to compare two ways of knowing Earth. One way is modern and distant, the planet seen from above, measured, scanned, and displayed. The other is older and embodied, the planet learned through travel, risk, repetition, and inherited signs. When people imagine that an old map may hold impossible knowledge, perhaps they are also sensing the power of that older world, where observation was slower but often more intimate. Yet intimacy is not the same as omniscience. A sailor could know a coast deeply without knowing the hidden bedrock of a polar continent. A navigator could read stars with skill without seeing beneath ice. Respecting old knowledge means respecting both its strength and its boundary. The lesson is not that ancient people secretly had modern instruments. It is that they carried a form of attention many modern people rarely need. They lived in a world where direction was earned by watching, remembering, and trusting the signs of Earth itself. The old map is powerful because it preserves a little of that vanished attention. It lets us glimpse a time when the world was not yet a finished image, but a living surface read by wind, water, stars, and the human body. When we ask whether an old map might show Antarctica without ice, we are also asking how humans once understood Earth before machines began to see for us. The question sounds as if it belongs only to geography, but it reaches into a deeper change in human life. For most of our existence, knowledge was not separated from effort. To know a place, someone had to go near it, cross it, suffer from it, return from it, or hear from another person who had done so. Distance had weight. Cold had weight. The sea had weight. A line on a chart was never simply a line. It was a compressed memory of exposure. Someone had faced water, wind, hunger, fear, darkness, and uncertainty before that line could exist. In the modern world, we often meet the planet after the danger has already been translated into information. We see coastlines without waves, mountains without cold, deserts without thirst, and Antarctica without the silence of standing there. This gives us great power, but it also changes the way mystery feels. An old map seems to come from a time when Earth was still resisting the human mind. It reminds us that before the planet became visible as a whole, it was encountered through fragments. A sailor did not know an ocean. He knew routes through weather. A traveller did not know a continent. He knew paths, rivers, settlements, and the stories attached to them. A mapmaker did not know the globe as a satellite knows it. He knew what could be gathered from reports, older charts, copied names, practical memory, and inherited ideas. That is why the Piri Reis map continues to disturb us gently. It stands between the embodied world and the measured world. It belongs to an age when the Earth was no longer only local but not yet fully global in the modern sense. The Americas were entering maps through unstable reports. Africa and Europe were already known through long traditions of navigation. The far south remained a place where expectation and uncertainty could merge. Antarctica, as modern science understands it, remained beyond ordinary human reach. So the old question becomes larger than the old claim. Did people once know Antarctica without ice? Or are we seeing the way human beings drew beyond the edge of what they knew? The safer answer leans toward the second, but the emotional force of the first remains. It remains because humans do not only want correct information. We want connection across time. We want to believe that some memory may have survived from before written history, before modern instruments, before the world became so clearly measured. Yet a useful history must not confuse longing with evidence. The Piri Reis map can teach us without proving an impossible past. It can show how knowledge moved through sailors, ports, empires, and copied charts. It can show how a southern blank could be shaped by expectation. It can show how a distorted line may become powerful when modern eyes already know what lies near the pole. Most importantly, it can remind us that every age sees the Earth through its own tools. Our ancestors saw it through bodies, journeys, and stories. Piri Reis saw it through sources gathered in a world of ships and power. We see it through satellites, science, and screens. None of these views is the whole of human experience. Each gives something, and each hides something. Perhaps that is why the map still matters. It asks us to remember the slow road between the first human footstep and the modern image of the planet, and to wonder what kind of knowing was lost when Earth stopped being a place we read with the body and became a picture we look down upon. The quiet answer begins by separating what is real from what is wished for. The Piri Reis map is real. It was made in the early 16th century. It survives as a fragment of a larger work. It belongs to a world of Ottoman navigation, Mediterranean exchange, Atlantic reports, copied charts, and inherited geographical ideas. It shows that people of its time were gathering distant knowledge with seriousness and skill. It also shows uncertainty, distortion, and the normal limits of mapmaking before modern measurement. The mystery around Antarctica is real in another way. It is real as a question that later viewers have brought to the map. It is real as a feeling of unease when a southern shape seems to echo a continent hidden beneath ice. But that feeling is not the same as proof. The map does not safely allow us to say that people 12,000 years ago mapped Antarctica without ice. That conclusion would require stronger evidence than a suggestive form on a damaged historical object. It would require a credible chain from deep prehistory to early modern sources. It would require agreement with what is known about Antarctic ice, geology, and the history of cartography. Without that chain, the claim remains a fascinating interpretation, not secure knowledge. This distinction may seem modest, but it is the heart of honest history. We do not lose wonder by refusing certainty too soon. We protect wonder from becoming misleading. The old map still deserves attention because it shows human beings trying to widen the known world under real limits. Since the beginning of our species, people have lived by extending knowledge beyond the immediate body. The first remembered path, the first return to water, the first warning about a dangerous shore, the first route taught to a child, all belong to the same long movement that later produced maps. Human beings learned small places first, then joined small places into wider worlds. They carried memory through speech, gesture, travel, and eventually signs. By the time Piri Reis drew his map, that ancient habit had grown into a vast network of sailors, ports, empires, and copied knowledge. A coastline could cross languages. A name could cross oceans. A mistake could cross generations. A useful line could survive beside an uncertain one. This is not a weakness of the past. It is the way knowledge often moves before it becomes stable. The Antarctica claim becomes tempting because it seems to turn this slow human process into a sudden revelation. It promises that a hidden truth may have survived from before writing, before cities, before the history we can easily document. But the safer lesson is quieter and perhaps more valuable. The past was not empty just because it was not fully recorded. Ancient people were observant, skilled, and deeply connected to their environments. At the same time, we should not give them specific achievements for which evidence is lacking. Respect does not mean exaggeration. It means allowing earlier people to remain real, capable, limited, inventive, uncertain, and human. The Piri Reis map stands beautifully in that middle place. It is not a proof of an ice-free Antarctica known to deep prehistory. It is not a meaningless curiosity either. It is a surviving trace of how humans tried to make a planet from fragments. It reminds us that maps are never only about land and water. They are also about trust, memory, fear, ambition, and the desire to make distance less unknowable. The southern shape may never give the answer that some people want from it, yet the map still gives something important. It teaches us to hold two ideas together. Curiosity should remain alive, and evidence should remain clear. In that balance, the old parchment becomes more than a mystery. It becomes a quiet lesson in how to look at the past without forcing it to become what we need it to be. A useful history does not ask us to choose between curiosity and caution. It asks us to keep both awake at the same time. Curiosity is what makes an old map worth looking at. It is what draws the eye toward a strange southern line and asks why it is there, where it came from, and what kind of memory may be hiding inside it. Without curiosity, the map becomes only parchment and ink. It loses the human pulse that brought it into being, but caution is what keeps curiosity honest. It reminds us that a question is not yet an answer, a resemblance is not yet proof, and a beautiful possibility is not yet a fact. In the story of the Piri Reis map, this balance matters more than the dramatic claim itself. The claim that the map shows Antarctica without ice is powerful because it offers a sudden doorway into a lost world. Yet the slower lesson is more useful. We learn that human beings often stand before incomplete evidence and must decide how to think without closing the door too quickly or walking through it too carelessly. This is not only a lesson about cartography, it is a lesson about the way we meet the past. The deep beginning of humanity was never fully recorded by the people who lived it. Early groups carried knowledge in bodies, voices, memories, and repeated acts. They knew paths, weather, animals, plants, coasts, and dangers, but most of what they knew did not become permanent. Later civilizations wrote more, built more, mapped more, and still lost more than they kept. Fire, water, war, decay, conquest, neglect, and simple time erased many traces. So when a rare object survives, we naturally want it to speak for everything that vanished. We want one map to answer for lost sailors, lost sources, lost coastlines, lost journeys, and lost worlds. But no artifact should be forced to carry the whole silence of history. It can only carry what its evidence allows. That is why honesty becomes a form of respect. If we exaggerate the map, we may seem to honor the past, but we actually replace it with our own desire. If we dismiss the map because it does not prove the most exciting story, we also fail it. The better path is quieter. We let the map show what it can show, a world of moving knowledge, practical skill, uncertain sources, and human attempts to organize a planet that no one had yet seen whole. We let Antarctica remain what science shows it to be, a real continent deeply hidden by ice, difficult to know without modern methods, and far more complex than a single phrase can hold. We let the mystery remain open where the evidence remains open, and we let the limits remain visible where the evidence ends. This is valuable for the listener, because it teaches a way of thinking that reaches beyond one old map. In a world full of claims that sound certain, the ability to pause is a kind of wisdom. A calm mind can ask what is known, what is guessed, what is repeated because it is attractive, and what has been left unclear. This is not a cold habit. It is a humane one. It allows wonder to breathe without turning it into confusion. It allows the past to remain alive without making it dishonest. Perhaps the true gift of the Piri Reis map is not that it solves the hidden story of Antarctica. Perhaps it is that it teaches us how to look at mystery with patience, how to value evidence without losing awe, and how to remember that the most useful questions are sometimes the ones that do not hurry toward an answer. An old map does not need to give us a final answer in order to leave us changed. Sometimes its value lies in the way it slows the mind. The Piri Reis map has carried many claims, some careful, some too confident, some shaped more by longing than by evidence. Yet beneath all of them there remains a quieter object, a fragment of parchment from a world still learning how to picture Earth. It does not speak like a modern instrument. It does not offer measurements that can settle every argument. It holds coastlines, notes, distortions, inherited ideas, and the marks of human effort. It reminds us that knowledge often survives imperfectly, and that imperfection is not the same as failure. A damaged object can still teach. A wrong line can still reveal a real attempt to understand. A mystery can still have value even when the most dramatic interpretation is not secure. This is the calm place where the story should end, not with the claim that the map proves Antarctica without ice, and not with the claim that wonder itself was foolish, but with a more useful thought. The past is worth listening to carefully because it is both rich and fragile. Since the earliest human beings began moving through landscapes, knowledge has always had to cross the distance between experience and memory. A path had to be remembered after the feet left it. A shoreline had to be carried after the boat turned away. A warning had to pass from one generation to another before the danger appeared again. Later, maps became one way of holding that fragile chain. They allowed one person's journey to become another person's expectation. They allowed a coast to remain present after the sailor was gone. They allowed the known world to grow larger than any one body could travel. But maps also carried the marks of uncertainty. They could preserve what was seen, what was copied, what was guessed, and what was hoped for. The Piri Reis map belongs to that long human inheritance. It stands between the first remembered ground and the modern image of the planet from above. It carries the old desire to make distance less frightening, to turn the unknown into shape, and to let memory survive beyond a single life. Antarctica, too, remains a reminder of limits. It is a real continent, but much of its body is hidden under ice. It tells us that even now, with instruments and science, Earth is not simply given to us at a glance. We have to learn it slowly, with evidence, patience, and revision. The old map and the hidden continent meet in the human imagination, because both speak of what is hard to see. One is hidden by time. The other is hidden by ice. Between them, the mind feels the pull of a lost answer. But a mature curiosity does not need to possess every answer. It can sit beside uncertainty without filling it too quickly. It can honor ancient skill without inventing ancient powers. It can accept that some lines on the map may never tell us exactly what their maker meant. This is a gentle lesson for anyone listening in the dark. The world is larger than our certainty, and history is deeper than our explanations. We should not make false claims to make the past feel meaningful. It is already meaningful because real people, with real limits, tried to understand the earth before them. They walked, sailed, remembered, copied, guessed, corrected, and left behind fragments. We inherit those fragments, not as owners of the final truth, but as caretakers of questions. And perhaps the quietest question is still the one that began with the old southern line. When we look at a map from another age, are we seeing what they knew, what they imagined, or what we are still hoping the lost earth might remember?